Okay, hello, I'm Joseph David Calero, and this is my synthesis blog for GELITWO section Z07. Okay, so for the first module, national and the global, being my first key takeaway is that being a colony, sometimes cultures have a higher appraisal on their literature by other cultures, since other cultures deem this certain culture or universal culture, as you can call it, as far more superior and more civilized than their own. So this makes the other cultures give more importance to these universal cultures than their own, and which can make it the key, adapting to that universal culture, the key for the country's evolution to becoming more global citizens or becoming more civilized in a way. So my next key takeaway is that it is not only the point of the literature, as Darmstadt points to how the national literature adapts to the universal culture in the national context. There are different national contexts with different cultures, like microcultures, that adapt the universal culture uniquely, which also makes sense since the universal culture still needs the microculture coming from the national context to personalize the universal culture from the local. So this puts into perspective that microcultures are also essential, not just the universal culture, but the microculture is there to help the universal culture adapt to the community. But my third culture, but as this progresses, from what I've observed in the real world, I have observed that the integration of social media, netizens become more informed and more aware, but they seek the information from shallow knowledge. So somehow they're woke, but their knowledge on the matter is very shallow. It's very surface level. It doesn't take them to a deep dive on the topics. So next is the module two. So the colonial past and the post-colonial present. The post-colonial theory puts a great emphasis on how literature before colonialism was affected by colonizers, rejecting rejecting colonial literature. Cultures that underwent colonialism somehow developed from the colonial literature. A great example of this is siesta in Filipinos, which Filipinos learned from Spaniards because Spaniards usually take their lunch and then they nap afterwards, which they call siesta. But Filipinos don't normally do that. They just have lunch, or I don't know how what they did back then, but they didn't have siesta. So they picked it up from Spaniards. So that's how the colonial period was able to give influence to the colonies that they have. So there are still also traces of the mark of the colonizers, which the culture and the literature cannot remove. The influence is too great. So, for example, different streets being named after prominent figures from the colonization era. So, different streets in vegan, you can see that it's very Spanish by accent. It comes from a Western influence, and other streets like Taft. Let's not look far. DLSU, Taft. So Taft is an American, and America has colonized the country. And the third key takeaway is that I still think that somehow the colonized countries tend to look at these colonial literature and rule can be a part of the identity of the colonized. So take for example use of siete sais. So this means seven and six. The language is Spanish, but it's still widely used by the masses. So these masses they look down on people that don't know what these numbers mean, thinking that the language is just deep Filipino. But in reality is it's just Spanish. So for example, when some people think don't know what sais is in don't know what sais is, they can't understand that or once, quince. So some people look at them like, "Oh, you don't know that? You don't know that much Filipino." But it's not really Filipino, it's Spanish. So that's my last takeaway for module 2. Next is module 3, Vagina Monologues. So for context, I'm a straight male who had gone to an all-boys school and had no sisters. I have no sisters. So the female genitalia, I think, is more taboo than imagined. And it's as if us straight men aren't meant to understand how the vagina works. So, but not only the vagina, just women's struggle in general. Okay, so for my first key takeaway is that I only learned about the pains and experiences of women when I had my first technically girlfriend. And it is not only until we gain secondhand experience. What I mean by that is when you somehow get a glimpse of the pain of women that they go through in a day-to-day basis, let's say menstrual pain, not getting the sexual satisfaction, and double standards met by the community, and especially if the community is well conservative. And yeah, so somehow those people close to us, we get to understand their pain better, and for some it can be earlier when they read theory through books, but that's only just theory. So next is the tabooness that creates a cloud. There is a tabooness that creates a cloud that blocks information from us straight males. Since it has been the social norm that vaginas are talked about more often. And the literature brings a clarity to the misunderstanding for us straight males. It is clear that there is a disparity with how men view vaginas and how women view penises. Since we came from a patriarchal society where, well, men were on top and women were supposed to serve the men. So next is basically female orgasms. Since the female orgasm doesn't have any purpose but for the female pleasure, unlike the male orgasm, which is also a sense of pleasure and a way for couples to procreate, the contrary can be said for the female orgasm. So somehow the female orgasm it wasn't given much importance back then. So we're just learning how to put importance to it now. Okay, so now for my three takeaways from our discussions is that first, the nosedive. Nosedive is like quicksand. Quicksand, why? Because quicksand, when you dip into it, you try to claw your way back up, but then you still submerge even worse if you try to struggle. That's how I viewed nosedive. We can spend our whole lives trying to become this thing, but then one failure and you keep trying to claw back at it without actually thinking. You just keep doing and doing and doing. You can somehow just keep sinking. Next is hero's journey. It can be a bit tricky to identify each step, even if there is a given framework, and identifying the different stages in the hero's journey can be quite a challenge, especially when you mess up one part, the other parts are connected. So some parts you can still pick it up, but then a misinterpretation in one part can lead to your demise in analyzing it well. So next is the mystery box game. So even if I was just a secretary and did not do anything at all, the biggest takeaway is that sometimes it's just better to just shut up. Because especially when the stakes are high, there's a great risk. But there's a great reward. But there is also a greater punishment in which your group can have more minuses than plus. Next is how GELITWO contributes to my development as a member of society. So it somehow gives me importance. It analyzes importance. It highlighted the importance of giving importance to things that are under my nose. Issues that I had not deemed too important were raised by the subject. And awareness is not enough to make me critically think that I may not be thinking about my society enough. This also enables me to consider and empathize the different circumstances that I am in. So my conclusion for the whole Jelly 2 subject, I thought I was just gonna have an easy time. I did not have the most easiest time. It was tasky, but it's what I expect from a 3 unit course. But I didn't expect it to be this much learning from a GE, and the maturity that I have as a fourth year student. I really did I really did have the maturity to learn from things, and I really wanted to eagerly learn. But I didn't expect to learn this much, especially from Sir Salapko. And he somehow, as a teacher, has pushed me to become that. Especially in the orientation when he said, "Na I won't just give you an easy four. You have to work for it." So me, essentially, I worked for it, and that's time.